Hey there.
Hey, look at that guy. My audio doesn't look like my video came on yet. Did it come on?
I don't know, man. I see this good-looking guy. It looks like Brad Pitt sitting in an airplane.
Okay, hang on. Let's see
You're
why.
listening to Idea Charger Radio.
Hey there, Success Chargers. It's Scott, and we're back here with episode 28. Listen, I've made you a grand promise, and I failed you. I did. I let you down. You want to know what happened? Last week, there was no episode. Sorry about that. Listen, it came back by, and honestly, I got a call over the weekend, last weekend, from a colleague of mine who said, "Look, Scott, I'm sick and I'm getting sicker. I don't think I can make my trip this week. Can you cover for me?" So I had the opportunity to quickly hop on when I got the confirmation on early Monday morning. Spent the morning ironing out some last minute travel. Hopped on a plane, flew to Tulsa, Oklahoma to go meet with some incredible people. A really good group of folks. And we went in, did a full day workshop with them. Just had a blast and got home really, really late on Tuesday night. And folks, I just flat didn't have it. I just didn't get it there. I'm so sorry. I left you hanging. But don't worry, because this week we're going to make up for it, because I've got a really, really awesome interview for you this week. We're going to get right to it, because I know that you've been sitting on the edge of your seat, chomping at the bit, ready to go, thinking about project management. Whether you've got your own thing going on full-time, whether you've got that entrepreneur, what we call the employee-preneur mindset that says, hey, I'm running this business just like it's mine. Everybody's involved in projects, and most of us have more than one going on at a time. And as you can imagine, there are a lot of best practices, a lot of study that's gone into this area, and even some certifications you can get as project managers. And some of you may have that. We're going to get into all of that and so much more. So this hour is dedicated to you, project manager. All the challenges, roadblocks, opportunities that lay before you. And you're going to hear about it in a really fun way with my good friend Andy Kaufman from Chicago, Illinois. So, hey, you'll want to make sure that you stay on until the end, because we do have a special offer for you this time that Andy graciously offered to all of you, the Success Charger listeners. So it's an exclusive offer. You'll want to stick around and hear about it. Let's get to it. Here's Andy Kaufman.
It's always interesting how it can be observed differently from another side. I mean, I looked at it as like, man, this is a guy who knows his stuff, totally under control, you know, no problem. So,
Oh, well, yeah, that's exactly what happened. That's
yeah,
exactly how it played out. Uh, let
yeah,
me let me take just a quick minute and introduce you.
yeah.
Now that we're rolling here, we've got with us Andy Kaufman, PMP.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds cool.
It sounds like a pimp is what it sounds like. It's not, though.
Andy
Okay, just saying.
Kaufman, Project Management Pimp, PMP. I like that. Works with organizations around the world who want to improve their ability to deliver projects and lead teams. You're a keynote speaker and executive coach with a passion for helping people get things done.
Mm.
And I would be remiss if I didn't mention you are a fellow podcaster. You host the People and Projects podcast. I've listened to a couple episodes,
Yeah,
so
yeah, good.
like that.
You stayed awake.
I
Excellent.
did. I
Thanks.
did.
Yeah,
Because, and you know why? It's because you focus on the intersection of project management and leadership.
yeah. Aha.
You like that? I dropped into my movie voice. He was a man. He led a project. It ran amok, and he landed the plane. You know,
Yeah.
something like that.
Right,
So,
yeah. It's like most projects, actually.
yeah, exactly, right? So I'm in Houston, Texas. You are in Chi-Town
Mm-hmm.
and up on the North Coast.
Yep.
See what's happening up there. So let's just kind of jump right in, because a lot of our listeners, I describe them as that square peg people keep trying to put in the round hole. All right. So
Right.
these are people that they see the world a little different. Okay. They've got that entrepreneurial mind. They've got
Mm.
some natural leadership, and they may be in a situation, if they're not already working for themselves, that's their dream.
Right.
That's where they
Right.
want to
Yeah.
go. And
That's
they might have that entrepreneurial mindset,
Mm-hmm.
which I kind of refer to as being an employeepreneur.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
All right. Now, I know I did that when I was in the financial services industry, which I did prior to being a facilitator and speaker and consultant. And I basically ran my practice like it was mine, and I
Yeah.
let somebody else pay the overhead.
Yeah, that's good.
And there were so many great lessons that I learned in that. Some good, some bad.
Well, that's how we learn, though, right? By making the mistakes too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were all valuable. They were all valuable. So let me ask you this, a very simple question that I imagine has a more complex answer, but you're the expert in this field. So how would you define project management?
Well, I'm glad you said that because I think a lot of times people think, well, wait, I'm that employeepreneur or I'm already have my own business. I'm not a project manager, man. But anybody running their own business knows they're wearing lots of different hats.
You bet.
And in-house at companies, increasingly people are asked to wear lots of hats. And I would argue that one of those hats is project manager, even if it's not the title. So, David Allen in his book, Getting Things Done,
Love that book.
To say it's life-changing, I think would be fair to say for people that have really kind of jumped into it. But, one of the things he'll say is if you have more than one to do, right? So if to get something done, it requires more than one to do, it's a project, right? So that's a pretty practical way to think of what a project is. And the Project Management Institute, so if I happen to say PMI, that's what I'm talking about, Project Management Institute.
You bet.
What they'd say is, there's knowledge you need, there's skills you need, there's tools, but what the end of their definition says, it's how do you meet requirements? So ultimately what project management is, how do you go from idea, someone's got this idea. Now, it could be the person who runs their own company, like, you know what, I want to offer this new product, or I want to write a book, or I want to develop a new sales strategy to try to fill a pipeline. Someone's got the idea, and all of us have ideas.
Yeah.
And you and I, and there's plenty of people that make a living talking about ideas, but ultimately, how do you get things done? And so project management is what are those things to help people get stuff done? And I would argue that project management's a little bit like conflict management, like just general interpersonal skill stuff. Mm-hmm. It's a core skill set that we all need. That's an element of our job. Of when the boss comes up and says, "Hey Scott, I need you to do this. Hey Andy, I need this delivered by next week." And what you want to go is, well, how do I do this? That's what think of project management as that, because I think too often we think of thick methodology documents, hoops to jump through. We think that is project management, but think of it as what are those things that are necessary to get things done?
Just gonna let that soak in for a minute.
Yeah, just let it simmer, man.
I'm thinking back. I have a friend of mine that is an instructional designer, and she was working in a consulting firm that works with a lot of project management folks. And this was several years back, and she kept referring to something called the PMBOK. PMBOK. And I was like, what the hell is the PMBOK? Just the Project Management Book of Knowledge. And I was like, what is it? And she shows me this nasty-looking giant notebook.
And that's just from the outside.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, he's also a comedian. You didn't know it was that Andy Kaufman. That's what you didn't know was going to happen today.
But I'm telling you, that book is, it's a global standard. And so, somebody could be in Shanghai listening to you. Somebody could be, in Europe. They could be in the States. But if you have any insomnia problems, it's a great book. But it's not designed to be a page turner. But it is. What are those things, those standard practices that if you do these things, it will help you? So it reads a little bit like a bad textbook, but part of what we do, when it's not more of a keynote, when it's more of a workshop, is try to bring that thing to life of how do you actually do that stuff?
No, what you bring about an important point, because a lot of times when people know that I'm here at point A and I want to be at point B, I'm here, I want to be there.
Yeah.
And they're looking for, some people really, certain personality styles are inclined to this.
Yeah.
Processes everything. What are the 14.3 steps that get me from A to B?
Exactly, yeah.
And then there's always a senior manager that says, can you do that in 12.3 steps?
Right.
And like, well, we could, as long as you explain to that process person where that other step went.
Yeah.
Right? If you take it out.
Yeah.
And so often we don't get that, and people get so caught up in, it's almost, they're looking for that prescriptive, what do I do now? 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 In essence, you get that, I guess, with a text or with a document like the Project Management Book of Knowledge.
Yeah.
But there's a little more art to that, would you say, to actually running the project?
Sure. Yeah. In fact, it's not only different from one company to another or industry to another within the same company. I mean, it's just, it's funny. I was just with a company where they have multiple departments in the same room, and the way one department does their projects is significantly different from the others. So usually, I mean, it's the whole thing about, culture, eats strategy for lunch every day, for breakfast,
Right.
whatever. I mean, the point is culture trumps everything.
Yeah.
And culture affects how projects get done. And so what we find is it usually doesn't work very well to say, you must do this and this and this. And if you don't, you're a loser. Right? We just find that doesn't work very well. It's much more, hey, these are some key things to keep in mind. Mm-hmm. Like the way that you might plan something might be different from how I would plan something, but I think we both agree that with a little forethought, the whole measure twice, cut once. Now, some people want to measure 50 times and cut once, right? Yes. And let's have a couple, steering committee meetings while we do it, and it takes forever to do things. But, there's some key principles. Like, do we know the why behind this? Just imagine trying to be tasked with doing something and you don't understand the why behind something. Mm-hmm. When you understand the why, it's more motivating. You know who to talk to. It gives clarity. That's a principle. It's in the PMBOK guide, the project management. It is the body of knowledge, not the book of knowledge. Although I love that name, the book of knowledge.
I like that. It's the body of knowledge. Yeah.
It is, yeah. But still, it's now the way it says to do it is you have to create a project charter and you have statements of work. So they make it maybe feels over encumbered on how you do that.
Right.
But if you just take a step back and say, listen, anybody listening to us, if they want to get something done, you better have a pretty strong why. Because if you don't have a strong why, you'll give up, or you won't know, or you'll be incomplete, or you'll deliver the wrong thing. Right? Yeah. So that's just one example.
In a couple of, it's been almost a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, I wrote a mini book about connection.
Yeah.
Because in my experience of working with lots of leaders and sometimes I used to teach a very basic project management class.
Yeah.
That was just enough that said, look, kind of like what you said at the beginning, everything you do is a project. If you'll allow your brain to think of it that way,
right,
it should have a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Right.
And people are like, I don't have an end. This project, this just never stops. I'm like, okay, that's a program.
Drifts off into the sunset.
Yeah. By definition, that's a program if it never ends. Mm. But could you break it into pieces? Could you, put it into chunks? And kind of reframe the mind. And you're right. There's this body of knowledge. It's like, look, you're not the first person on earth to take on a project.
In fact, since the first person on earth, we've been doing projects.
Yeah, exactly. Right. There was one project there was one deliverable. Don't eat the apple. Right. That was it.
Exactly. Screwed it up at the beginning.
So the very first project didn't work. I guess we could argue it was the second project because God had to create the earth first, but now we're in the creation, and that's a whole other discussion for another podcast.
That's a good point, but you know what? That is so true, man. That is so true.
So let me ask you this. I mean, aside from, you have some people that just don't want to accept the fact that there is a common body of knowledge or common, standard practices, best
practices.
Good
practices, yeah. Right.
Yeah, I like to reframe it and say, guys, let's set the terminology aside for a minute.
Yeah.
Just have a conversation.
Yeah, right.
If you, one of the frameworks that I use is I do a lot of work with DDI. I don't know if you're familiar with DDI, but they have something they call their key principles, and they have something called interaction essentials, and it's kind of a 5-step process to walk through a conversation. And the first part is open the conversation. And I add to that, I said, you know what? If you can't explain to the person or the people in front of you what you're hoping to accomplish in that particular interaction in 2 minutes or less, you don't know.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, and, absolutely.
And projects are the same way. Let's just give me the let's go back to an airline analogy. Give me the 40,000 foot flyover.
Yeah.
When I look at the board when I'm getting on the plane, where does it tell me this plane's going?
Right.
I don't care how you get there. I don't care if we have to circle the airport a few times before you land. As long as we land safely, and I can make my connection or get to my meeting. That's it.
Yeah.
So what, aside from people that get hung up by the terminology or the process itself, what are some other reasons that you see projects get derailed and have struggles, and where do the wheels come off the bus?
Oh yeah, man. There's great research that will, there's many different lists of leading causes of project failure, but often one of the, just to keep it completely practical, one of the things that leads to project failure, or at least struggle, is this cognitive bias that seems to be wired into us. That is, it's called the planning fallacy, which basically says the further something is out, the more optimistic we are, right? So if someone listening to us has a deliverable that's due a year from now, hey, Scott, is that possible? Absolutely, yeah. If it's due in 2 weeks, are you nuts? Right? So the further something is out, the more optimistic we are. And so sometimes what happens is we just sign up for too much. Kind of like your point about chunking it down.
Yeah.
Is that if we look at the thing to deliver the whole thing, well, you know what? We got a lot of time. The world was created in a week. To further your analogy,
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we can figure this one out. And so the planning fallacy, we succumb to it all the time. It seems like we're an optimistic species, which is good, right? Instead of just being around depressed, we can do this, right? Maybe it's part of the American psyche, but this bias has been seen. It doesn't matter where you grew up. The further something is out, the more optimistic we are. So here's something that once again, to say that David Allen changed my life. There have been a lot of people that changed my life. But we had an interview on the podcast probably a year and a half ago, or it might have even been 2 years ago. But this guy wrote a book called The Procrastination Equation. All right. So it's a really clever book. The guy's a scientist. He's not a pundit. And he breaks down what leads to procrastination. So, all right. So check this out. I don't have any drawing tools, but this is the start right here, Scott. All right. This is when something's due. Now, this could be an action item that anybody listening to us, this is when it's due. This is when we start. This is when it's due. So we got time here. And the vertical axis is how much work gets done. Okay. So as you might guess, the work goes, yep.
Oh, the proverbial hockey stick graph.
Right, exactly, yeah. And so, and this author, Pierce Steele, he breaks it down into domain after domain after domain of how this happens. And so what leads to projects to struggle? Well, one thing is we're too optimistic. Another thing is it's too far out there, and so we don't really feel motivated. So here's his antidote for it. So if this is the timeline, start and finish.
Right.
Put a stake in the ground, stake in the ground, stake in the ground. So it's intermediate stakes in the ground. And the way he shows it in the book, he goes, and as you get close to the stake in the ground, it goes up and it goes up. And this happened actually is a year ago right now. A company in Chicago hired me to develop a facilitation skills class from scratch. And so I know myself, January and February, I would have wasted the time. March, I would have started thinking about it, but I'm busy. April, I would have started working. May, I wouldn't have slept, right? I mean, I would have just done the same sort of thing. We had checkpoints almost every Thursday, because I learned this from Pierce Steele. Put the stake in the ground. Guess what happened, man? It was Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. The work really picked up right before that. Friday, Saturday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. As I got close to that checkpoint, all of a sudden it's amazing. I can't come to the party empty-handed, right? I've got to be able to show them stuff. And so a practical thing that any one of us can do is if you've got something due, the further out it is, and I would argue if it's more than 2 weeks, you're doomed. So if you've got something 2 months out, you're not going to give it the time it needs. If it's 6 months out, forget about it. A year, seriously, really. So this would say approximately no more than 2 weeks out, have some sort of checkpoint. That's either for you or if you're delegating work to somebody else, make sure you have this checkpoint 2 months or 2 weeks or less out, because the further out, they're just going to drift. And here's just one more thing related to that is I know myself, if we wouldn't have had those checkpoints, then I would have said, well, I think I know what they need. Come on, Scott, you and I are brilliant. We know what they need. And at the end, I would have gone, ta-da! What do you think about this facilitation skills class, right? Because the longer we work on something, the more it becomes our baby. And we love this thing. We love this thing. And then you deliver it, and somebody goes, hey, your baby's ugly. It's not, you didn't deliver what we want.
Man, you came back to childbirth. Good job.
Well, listen, one of the first checkpoints I had with this customer, they looked at my draft slides, and they were very, very draft, and they go, you got pictures on these slides. I'm like, yeah. And they're like, that's a problem. We don't do any pictures, even in training. Everything must be bullet point. And part of me felt like, Scott, I mean, welcome to 1989 or something like that. But that's their culture there. And if we wouldn't have had these checkpoints, I would have delivered this, what I would have thought was awesome, and they didn't like it. And guess who gets to guess who judges? For any one of us, when we deliver, it's the customer who judges. And if we don't deliver what they wanted, we can blame them. But there's checkpoints along the way. So not having those checkpoints, that would be an example of something that leads to projects to struggle. And, I mean, there's countless others. I'd say if I had to pick one more, Scott, it would be just denial of risk. It's just that we're, maybe it's just because we're so optimistic. But here's something that PMI would say is every time you have a status update meeting, so with a key customer, with your team, you should talk about risk. It should be, and the conversation is not like, what could go wrong? It's not about panicking. It's more like, hey, do you see anything on the horizon that we need to know about? Is there anything new that could be going wrong that's out there? It's not about being negative as much as just keeping our head out of the day-to-day and getting up, watching the horizon more. Hey, we identified some in the past. Are the plans we put in place? So it's this denial of risk, which is different from being risk averse. It's good to be risk averse, although that can cause us to be Kodak'd, because we don't take some risk. But denial of risk is the deadly one. Denial of risk basically says, risk? What risk? Right? Or if somebody brings up a risk, you go, don't be so negative. Yeah, come on, Danny Downer. Come on, it's gonna be okay. If somebody brings up a risk on a project and they're looked at as being negative or not being a team player, I'm telling you, it is close to the kiss of death on that project. But if all we do is complain about the risk, that's just an excuse. So in that PMBOK guide, in the body of knowledge, it has some good processes around how do you go from, all right, it's a risk to, well, what do we do about it?
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of stuff we could talk about, but those are just a couple that come to mind of what gets in the way of us being able to deliver.
There's so many parallels as you're describing that scenario, right? That you need to talk about risk. We've got to talk about it every time we get together. What's at risk? What's new? What's changed? What information do we have that we didn't have before?
Right.
All those kinds of things. And it, from when I'm in the room talking to a lot of managers, sometimes there's a real vulnerability in that, right? So, and for some people, they're like, I don't want my boss to think I don't know what the risks are. I don't think I don't want anybody else on the team to know that I don't have a firm grasp. And I'm like, then your project is doomed.
It is. But I'll tell you, haven't you seen that? I would say between ages 28 and 32, for me, I went through probably the hardest time in my life, deep anxiety. I'd never had anything like this before in my life, Scott. And as I kind of came out of it, one of the things I realized, was that I felt like, I was starting to see some chinks in my armor. And, I felt like I was taught, listen, when you're good, you don't have any weaknesses. You can't be transparent. Everyone has to think you're the stud, and that was just one of the main things I came out of that. Listen, we don't have to, as leaders, as entrepreneurs, we don't have to have all the answers. We don't have to be without weakness. In fact, if anything, we're better when we realize where we are. We do have those weaknesses and where we do have those struggles, right? And so it's just, I don't know. I don't remember this lady's name, but it was probably 4 years ago that I interviewed her, but she helps MBAs. So imagine this, her job, or one of her areas of focus with her books is, you just got an MBA. Now, how do you get into the workplace? And she said a common thing she sees is that these people in particular feel like, listen, I've got all this education. I can't say the words, I don't know. I have to pretend like I've got all the answers, And she goes, it's a real concern. Yeah. In fact, I teach an MBA class, a project management MBA class, and somebody brought in a cup this last year. On the outside, it said, MBA for when your BS will only take you so far.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, it's good. But I think for all of us, sometimes, like you're saying, it's vulnerable. We feel vulnerable when we say, hey, we've got these risks or I've got these issues. Mm-hmm. But if we don't have that conversation, then we've got this like mass hallucination going on that everything is fine. How are you? It's fine. How's your project? Fine. Right as we're going over a cliff.
Right.
And I bet when you go over a cliff, I've never done this, but I bet for the first second, it feels kind of good. Yeah.
I've never done this, but
it's that last second that's not so fun. Yeah.
It's all fun and games till, well, anyway, somebody loses an eye, goes off a cliff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
loses their, and in the real world, they lose the job, they lose their credibility,
Yeah.
they get demoted, or worse, they get sent off to special projects. It's like the kiss of death in a company. So.
Hey, wait a minute. My early career, I had a title that was special projects. I thought that was a
Yeah.
good thing.
But look what you're doing now, man.
Well, yeah, now they're paying me a lot more to come back in and give them advice. So
Absolutely.
very often you have responsibility for a deliverable. You are deemed to be the project manager, but all of the other people that you are forced to work with have no reporting responsibility to you.
Right.
Like if you look at the organizational chart, they have a boss. It ain't you,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
How do you encourage people? I mean, what are some techniques, some takeaways, some ideas that you might share with somebody to help make sure that you're effective in trying to manage projects, whether it's in a formal or an informal setting, to sort of keep things moving forward? How do you hold people accountable? How do you how do you enforce, kind of the shared goal and the greater good of the whole team forward when you don't have maybe administrative authority over somebody?
Yeah. It's a great question because increasingly people with, bona fide project manager titles, they are leading teams that they don't have authority over necessarily. And so, there are a number of things, I would say, and I think this is really consistent with what I've heard you talk about over and over and over, is that the dirty little secret of business is that everything's done on relationships, And so even if they don't report to you, if you use some of the, many, many ideas from the Cooksey Connects and just the, how to build connections with people, that there's a lot. Because, I mean, Scott, I'm sure you can think of people over the course of your career that you do anything for, not because they're your boss.
Oh, I'd run to the wall.
Oh, yeah, because you respect them or what they did for you.
Mm-hmm.
So there really is something about, listen, maybe the fallacy is that you can force people to do things if you are the boss. Right? You're only a leader if you've got followers, right? And so build the connections. So that's certainly one of the things. But here's a really, really practical thing that I learned from Robert Cialdini. So I interviewed his co-author named Steve Martin, which was kind of funny. Andy Kaufman interviewing Steve Martin. Neither of us comedians.
Let me guess. That is the podcast that has the highest number of downloads of disappointed people.
Right, exactly. There's actually an Amazon review on one of my books that said, I bought it because I thought it was the comedian. And I'm so disappointed. I'm like, I'm sorry. Yeah, I can't help it.
Joke's on you.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. So Cialdini, in his book, it's called Influence, is the book, The Psychology of Persuasion. It's like a classic on influence. And what in the book he calls the 6 weapons of influence. And in these situations, when you have to try to influence someone without authority, these weapons really come into play. And so this is just one of them. He calls it commitment and consistency, which is to say, in fact, here's the example that he gives in the book. He'll say, it was a restaurant, actually in the Chicago area, if I recall, and the restaurant's taking a reservation, and what they'd say, all right, we got you down a party at 2 Saturday night at 6:30. And by the way, if you can't make it, just give us a call. We'll see you Saturday night at 6:30. Right? I mean, that's a pretty normal sort of conversation to have.
Right.
All right. Most people showed up. It was a good restaurant. But of the people that did not show, 30% of them didn't call. And for a restaurant, depending on their business model, that's money, left, so to speak, on the table. And so they changed the script just this small way. What they changed
what you did there.
Yeah. Okay.
Money on the table. Yeah.
Yeah, right, thanks. Yeah. They changed the script in just this very small way. They say, all right, we got you down party 2 Saturday night at 6:30. And by the way, if you can't make it, will you call us? Pause. Okay. So, I mean, Scott, if somebody asks you or me that on the phone, will you call us? What are you going to do? I mean, we're going to say, sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Sure. Yeah. I mean, we're not going to go to some sort of like daytime or app to say, make sure to call, right? Without even thinking, we just casually go, yeah, all right, sure.
Yeah.
That simple question dropped the number of no-shows without a call from 30% to 10% overnight. Okay. So how do you apply that in the workplace? Here's what I've learned to do is in the past, I was like that first reservation person, like, hey, you know what? Here's the assignment. I'm not their boss. I'm like, hey, it's due next Friday. Let me know if you have any issues. Get back to me if you have any issues. I think that'd be a kind of a normal conversation for someone to give. But Cialdini would say, if you want to influence them, what you say is, hey, you know what? It's due next Friday. Can you get that done by Friday? Pause. Now, there's probably 3 possible answers to that, right? Yes, no, and maybe. If they say yes, Cialdini's research says they're more likely to do it because they're on the hook. They made that commitment. And when someone practices this, and by the way, I find it works with kids too, but
Thank you.
I've seen people squirm under this. They go, yes. Okay. Now he'll also say that the more public they make that commitment, the more likely they're going to do it. Doesn't work with politicians, by the way, but it does work with fellow coworkers. But so maybe copy them on an email or in a meeting, try to get that commitment. But if they say yes, they're more likely to do it. But what if they say no? Can you hit next Friday? No. Well, it can change the conversation. Then it can be, well, what's getting in the way? They might say, well, my boss has other priorities for me, or, I'm going to be on holiday during that time. But how about this? We know about it now, not like a week or two from now. Mm-hmm. And so that can allow us to figure out, well, man, how are we going to deal with this? Or if it's truly going to delay the project, maybe, well, listen, this is going to delay the project. Do you want to come with me to the meeting with, the big guy to talk about, so it just allows us to have a different sort of conversation. So the interesting one is if they say maybe, can you hit next Friday? And they go, maybe. I just learned from Cialdini, treat maybe like a no. Maybe's a no. Have the same conversation. What would it take to make it a yes? What's getting in the way? And the tricky one is maybe's very close cousin, probably. If they go, hey, you're going to hit that date? And they go, probably. Well, then maybe what you do there is say, especially if this is somebody who you're responsible to, it's part of your team, but maybe they're higher level in the organization. And so you don't want to go, well, I'm going to go talk to mom and dad about it. You're not going to escalate it right away. So an idea there that I got from the Heath brothers in their book Decisive is set a tripwire. So if it's due a week from Friday, maybe what you do is say, hey, you know what? 3 days from now, let's set a little tripwire. If you're on track already by then, we'll stick with it. But if we're off track already by then, okay, so we're at least giving them the benefit of the doubt.
Right. But
you're setting this tripwire so we don't end up a week from Friday with nothing. And so it's just as, I'm not saying it's magic, but I got to tell you, I have seen this work in so many ways. It's not being a jerk. It's not being bossy. It's not, it works higher level up. Like, you need somebody to sign off on something. You need a customer to sign off on something. It's an honest question. As long as you watch your vocal tone and your body language when you ask it, can you get that sign off by this date? Can you have this done by then? The key is pause. Wait for them to answer. And then then act accordingly. That's just one example.
Wow. And I like what you said there too. It's watch your tone of voice. How you do that is really important. Because, again, so often people will say, well, I asked him if it was okay.
Yeah, right.
Well, what you said was, you're going to have that to me by Friday, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they almost will lead you to an answer.
Yeah. There's this book called, Why Great Leaders Don't Take Yes for an Answer is the name. Why Great Leaders Don't Take Yes for an Answer. We had the author Michael Roberto on the podcast. He, former Harvard Business School professor, and he talks about an example back in the Nixon administration. It was Vietnam War, things were not going well. He's like, we need a win. And they as best they could tell, there were some POWs deep into northern Vietnam, and they're like, we could send in the rough equivalent of what they're called back then, special forces. I don't know what they're called then, but this would be a win if we could get those guys out of there. And they did all kinds of practice. It looked like those guys were there, but in the weeks getting really close to the operation, after all this training, all of a sudden things seemed a little still down there from the satellite images. And somebody brought the news to Nixon, and he goes, there's a chance that we're going to get there and nobody's there. And I don't remember the exact quote from Nixon, but it's basically saying, well, make sure that doesn't happen. But the point that Roberto makes in the book is the way that we respond when people bring bad news to us basically tells them whether they should keep bringing bad news to us. And that's what I kind of took from your comment there, that the tone of voice, we might basically be telling people, lie. Tell me that everything is good when it's not. And, that leads to all kinds of dysfunction where, all kinds of dysfunction where people are like, you know what, I'm going to say everything's good. What's my status? It's green.
Right.
I actually worked for a company where the status report, instead of green, yellow, red, it was smiley face, frowny face, and whatever you call that face.
Yeah. Meh.
Every week, smiley face, smiley face. You know, it's just crazy.
You know, it was really interesting, and I wish I'd snapped a photo of it. I know I can find the artwork, but, you know, my father-in-law was recently in the hospital, and when you're in a hospital room, they have this whiteboard that's up on the wall, right? And it keeps track of, like, this is your nurse, this is who the doctor is that's on call, this is,
right,
you know, what's your goal for the day, right? So they break it into chunks, right? It's like you're here with, you know, this particular ailment, but what's our goal today? Maybe the goal today is, you know, not have any pain, you know, or to, you know,
walk 100 feet or something. Like that.
Something, right? It's not, you know, go run a marathon. It's just, can you get up out of bed? You know, for some people, that's a big deal. But at the bottom of it, there is, it's like the pain scale, right? And on the one side, it says, you know, how much pain are you feeling today? And it says 0 or 1, and it has the smiley face. You know, the 9, 10 is at the other end, and it has like a crying face. And then it has all of the iterations in between, you know, for like every, like, is it a 0, 1? Is it a 2, 3, a 4, 5, a 6, 7, an 8, 9? You know, and as you go across, so there's, you know, 5 or 6 of those. My 3.5-year-old daughter was sitting in my lap while she was talking to her GPA while he's there in the laying in the hospital bed, and she turns around, she goes, "Daddy, what are all those faces on the wall for?" And I was like, how do I explain this to a 3.5-year-old?
Right, yeah.
And I realized if we're able to clearly communicate what it is, the point is, what we're asking somebody to do, what they're asking to tell us, if we would presume everybody has the curiosity of a 3.5-year-old, and we could explain it that crazy simple, a lot of times we could, and our projects, I think, would run better.
You know, that's such wise advice, Scott. And the interesting thing about that is there's times where I'm going through it that I think I'm at a 7 or 8 or 9. You know, I'm not talking about the pain at this point. I'm talking about some business situation, whether it's a project or with a customer or something like that. And one of the best guys I ever hired, he was a former Vietnam vet. So he was older than me, but he just kind of like the wisdom of life had been burned into this guy. And I was freaking out about something. I'm like, oh, you know, the sky's falling. I'm sure I came off that way. I'm like, oh, I'm 9 or 10 on the pain scale. And he walks in, kind of shuts my office door. He goes, "Andy, no one's getting walked around to the back of the house and getting shot here." And so, you know, Brian Regan, the comedian, actually has a funny thing about the pain scale. He goes something like, "I heard that I don't know, it's the thigh muscle, whatever that one is, or not the muscle, the bone is supposed to be the most painful." He goes, "So they asked me, what pain is it?" Well, anyway, I won't say it as funny as Brian Regan, but you have to watch that thing.
I'm going to find that.
Yeah, it's worth getting. But we think sometimes that it's a 9 or 10 what we're going through. But the truth is, this is one of my favorite things about getting older, is you realize in the scheme of things, dude, this is like a 3 at worst, you know. But I'm acting like it's a 9 or 10, you know. So just being, you know, maybe you need to come up with the Cooksey scale of pain on projects, you know.
Interesting.
Like,
Interesting.
settle down, dude. It's only a 4. You think it's a 9 or 10? Shut up.
Yeah, right. And it's funny because, you know, you mentioned, you know, in your late 20s and early 30s, it's a lot of our, you know, listeners are 20s and 30s, and as you're thinking about that, those are the times where you're like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me.
Oh yeah. Right.
And I remember things that happened to me when I was in that age range.
Yeah.
And then I had some things happen in my mid 30s that redefined how painful those early things were.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Yeah.
And they really were 3s and 4s.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And today, you know, I have a life now that is very satisfying, very happy. You know, I'm spiritually strong. There's a lot of great things that are going on in my life right now, and it's just, I look at this and I go, you know what? For all this, the anxiety, for all the frustration, for all the things I'm concerned about, it's concern rather than worry.
Yeah, right. It is so true. And I don't know if you can serve it up to someone to the point where they get it until they have the perspective, you know, Scott. I mean, I hope someone listening to your wise words there can kind of appreciate that, because I guess maybe this is back to your connections emphasis, that to me, I didn't know that, but I had this, the church I attended, that was the former head of HR at Motorola also attended. He did executive coaching. So in 2001 is when I started my business.
Mm-hmm.
And about 6 months before then, he did a 2-day offsite with me, because I wanted to know, is this something that I should do? Is this something I could do, from his perspective? And we had, I mean, it was intense. It was deep. It was exhilarating. It was exhausting. But one of the conversations we had, I told him about that time period, and he goes, Andy, I went through the same thing at roughly the same ages. A lot of the highest performers I know go through something like that. And so, it of course, has nothing exactly to do with the pure topic of what we're talking about today, but I think it has everything to do with sometimes we doubt ourselves, or we feel like we need to try to be somebody who we're not. It has freed me so up to not have to try to be someone else. My boss's expectations, my mother-in-law's expectations. Am I doing what God has wired me up to do? Am I doing what I do best? Am I making the most of this day? I mean, those sorts of things. It makes it easier to interact with people. It makes it easier to focus on my projects, because I'm not as distracted with all that other stuff. So if somebody's struggling with a lot of that stuff, they're listening to the right guy, Scott Cooksey here, because that wisdom that you're sharing, man, is it's stuff that we don't get in a textbook. We don't get in school, right? So we think we're the only one.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. Hey, I have another question for you, and then a quick series of questions I call my lightning round.
Okay.
But before I do that, you had included in our correspondence ahead of time. You also look. Let's be honest. A lot of people, when they think of project management, they go, "OMG, I don't want to do it."
It's like mandatory compliance training.
Oh God, it's awful. It's the ethics continuing education class as a financial advisor. It's the state insurance license stuff you have to sit through that people take now they would take a smartphone, but when I was doing it, they would take like 2 or 3 New York Times crossword puzzles.
Oh, is that right?
And you would just sit in the back and work those because you had to be in the room for 8 hours of training. So they would just buy it all in one day.
You didn't want to be there, and neither did the instructor.
No. But they would show up because they were getting paid to be there, right? And you were there because you wanted to keep your license, right? And it was awful.
Sure, yeah.
But I hope what everybody's noticed is what I've always noticed about you is there is an incredible resilience and spirit to you and how you approach projects. And it's really cool. It's a great energy. And I would imagine that there are some people saying, I might need to get a little coaching, and I'd like to get it from somebody who's not completely boring. and certainly, you do have the People and Projects podcast.
Yeah.
That's one place they can get access to you. But would you mind sharing with them where else they can get some e-learning and some other things that you do offer?
Yeah. I mean, most of what we'll do is we'll go in-house at an organization, kind of like you do. And so we've got this class called the Essentials of Project Management, and it scales well across the organization. Doesn't matter if it's administrative assistants or project managers or whatever. But, since a lot of your listeners maybe are running their own thing, it's not like they've got this, group of 20 people that they can take for 2 days and put them in a room for something like that. And so we've got that Essentials of Project Management class in an e-learning format. And, for the longest time, I thought of e-learning as, woefully boring. But I'm telling you, I'm amazed at how the tools work these days. And so that particular class, it's divided into what we say is 4 weeks of work. And it's not full time. You can just do it at the middle of the night. You can do it, over lunch. And the feedback has been really positive that there's people go, you know what, this is so much more interesting. And it's not just listening to me. You said, I'm not totally boring. I'm only mostly boring. Okay. But beyond that, but they not only get the teaching, but they go off and do some exercises, and they email me and I give them feedback on it. So it's not just purely one way. There actually is interaction. But the website is courses, as in you're taking a course, plural, courses.I-leadonline.com. So you can put that in the show notes. But
we'll do that.
I'd be glad to give a coupon code for your listeners to get a discount on that, because one of the things I find is that especially people running their own thing, they're so busy pouring into other people that it's difficult to get poured into their own bucket. And so the podcast that you offer here really helps. Your newsletter really, really helps. And if this is something that could help, I'd be glad to give a discount. So I'll send you.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's cool. So we're going to set that up. We'll in the show notes, which you will find if you're listening on your iPhone or if you're on Stitcher Radio, whatever you're doing, it'll be in the show notes there. But I'll also have a page at ideacharger.com/ I think we're on episode 28. I think is where we are.
Good for you, man.
Look at the opening of the line there at the top. In the show notes on the ideacharger.com site, just you can go in there, go in the search box, type in Andy, and you'll find him and his information. We'll have some links there for you so you can get there. And thank you for that. Really appreciate
my pleasure.
that.
Yeah.
And certainly have it there. All right, so one more serious question, and then we'll kind of get into some fun. Well, they're all serious. They're really, really important. All right.
That's right.
So here we go. An additional challenge, and we've kind of talked around this issue a little bit, so I just wanted to kind of bring it back to this as we continue to kind of pull this to a close. See, the project has a beginning, a middle, and an end. We're going to move toward the end now.
Let's go for a marathon here.
Yeah, exactly. Let's keep it the longest podcast ever. We're going to move this to Blab and go 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, keep trading off the hot seat. One of the challenges you see a lot, though, is, my boss told me I needed to go do something, or my client is demanding something from me. I'm trying to put it all together, but there's a third party that's like got the purse strings. It's almost like they're diametrically opposed. It's like I'm told we have to make money for the company. You're told not to spend any money for the company. Is it cost containment or is it value creation? You get a conflict between various stakeholders because at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. I'm going to ask you the same question I ask audiences when I go out. Why do businesses exist?
Right. To make the owners rich. Everybody knows
to make money. Yeah, exactly. Right. It's to make money. So why do we fight so much? And how do we, I imagine that connection and personal relationship plays a role, but are there some other techniques we could add to that help people navigate those difficult stakeholders?
It's a great question because there's no easy way around it, because sometimes it's that they're difficult. Sometimes they just have conflicting incentives. I mean, sometimes this one is incented to keep costs down, and this one is incented to deliver, because we just want the top line, and so it's difficult. But who's the guest? His name is Tom DeMarco, who's kind of a granddaddy in the IT industry, and he's written a number of books. But one of the things he told me that has nothing to do with IT, but he said, you can get anybody to agree about something at 30,000 feet. Okay, so I mean, in U.S. politics, you can get both Republicans and Democrats to agree to some degree that the national debt is an issue. Right? It's an issue. You can get everybody to agree with that. Where do you get into the fights about how to solve it? Right? That's where you get into the fight. You can get everyone to agree that a certain initiative, we all want the same thing. Yeah. We all want the same thing. This is about delivering value to the customer. Yes, we agree, boss. Yes, you're exactly right. Right? It's where do you get into the fights? It's down here. And so it's a principle from project management for sure. But what Tom DeMarco taught me is when things stay too high level, that it's actually a sign of unresolved conflict, which to me was a little bit counterintuitive at first, but the more I've kind of tried to chew on it. So his point, he didn't really say it this way, but this is kind of how I've adapted it, is if you're on an airplane, you're at 30,000 feet. If you try to get to 10,000 feet in a second, that's scary, right? Are the wings still attached, right? I mean, that's not, sometimes if you try to go into the weeds too quickly and pick that battle between those competing incentives and try to pit them against each other, like you're saying this and you're saying this, maybe that doesn't work very well, but his illustration might be a little bit more of a glide path for a landing. Like, are we getting a little bit more detailed, progressively more detailed? But okay. if we continue here, right? So that's a bad sign. And if you're trying to get into the weeds too quickly, politically, that might be kind of difficult to kind of influence the people around there. But eventually, the good practice, at least what PMI would say, is that someone needs to be the person that you escalate to. So who's the person that breaks the tie, sort of thing? Who's the person that ultimately is that decision maker? And so that varies pretty significantly depending on the company, the culture, the situation. But a leading factor of success in projects is it's called executive support or support from the sponsor. And I think a lot of us think, well, that's what I'm doing because I don't have support from that person. They barely even know my name.
Right.
And that one of the reasons why they need to keep following you is you'll teach them how to build a relationship with that person, right? It's not just about managing down. Right? How do you manage up and how do you build that relationship with them? So like you identified when you said the question, building relationships so they at least trust you, that they see that it's not about you. It's about trying to what's best for the company, what's best for the customer. The more it ever comes off that it's about us, it's going to be really, really difficult. The more we can say it's really not about you versus you, it's about what's best for the customer. Try to find something higher level, that we can all agree on, but then can you drill in? So it gets a little trickier if they're difficult people in the sense of just obstinate and jerks. In that sort of situation, I had Amy Cuddy on the podcast just recently. She's the TED Talk superwoman, body language lady.
Oh yeah.
She was extreme. It was a lot of fun. But we talked about that very scenario where if you go into a meeting and you've got somebody who's just, you just say, I see horns coming out of their head there, right? They're breathing fire, and they smell like brimstone. It's what's tempting. She would say what's tempting is we just kind of close up, right? Or you do it like at the when the international leaders get together, for a meeting, and our president won't look at Putin, they won't look at each other in the eye, or stuff like that. And both her and I had Nick Morgan on talking about a book on trust. It's about communication and trust. Nick is all about body language. In fact, his a better book is called Power Cues. He talks about these power cues. Nick would say, and I think Amy would agree with it, if you got that person that's a jerk, don't say, hey, I'm not going to go to that meeting because he's there, she's there. You go to that meeting because there's some things that they won't say if you're face to face. But if you're not there, it's it's open season. Or I think they would both say, not only show up in the meeting, you go sit right next to them. And you don't collapse. What you do is more open and stand up when you can. And that feels maybe uncomfortable. Some people are sleazy, but their point is too often what we do around those difficult people is we just start kind of backing down. And it's not about being a jerk back to the jerk. It's, in fact, Amy said it this way, that you don't go into it like a little Tony Robbins, like, I'm awesome, I'm going to fire myself up, I'm good looking, you don't do something like that. But what you do is you tell yourself, affirmations from her perspective are not aspirational as much as what's true. And the truth is, I know my project. The truth is, this is good for our customers. The truth is, we have to resolve this. And so affirming what we know is true will actually give us the confidence. And she might suggest going into a stall in the bathroom and doing your Superman as well. And so if somebody feels comfortable, go for it. But 1 second. Okay, I'm back. All right. So, but if
you're listening to the audio, by the way, go back and just find the video of that moment. That's what you've got to find. All right, carry on.
But I don't know. It's all this at risk. And let's face it, you and I are in a business where it's easy to oversimplify, and we don't want to do that, right? But in the real world, we have to deal with these sort of situations. And I think I spent too much time at the 30,000-foot level, not willing to engage. I think I spent too much time saying, they're the boss, I'm not. I can't find some ways to try to influence them. And I think that if your listeners really say, I want to get good at this stuff, I want to get good at influencing people no matter what level they are. I don't want to be fearful in the sense of, I'm not worthy to be in their presence, because the more you spend time with executives, Scott, don't you notice they're just people? And they've got many of the same insecurities as what most of us have. And in fact, it gets worse the higher they get up, because they can't share those insecurities with other people if they feel like. So I would just say that there's a lot of wisdom that people can tap into in these situations. It doesn't make it easy, but there are ways to try to make some progress on it.
Man, I'm going to leave it right there. Now, I've got a couple of quick questions as we switch gears into the the lightning round. All right.
Okay.
Now there's a couple of.
Is there a timer on this, dude?
Let's just say, let's try to keep your answers to under 30 seconds.
Got it.
All right. Just something quick. First thing that pops in your head, stream of consciousness. Now, there's a couple of terms, right? These first two questions are about these two terms that I think are words that are really dangerous. You like that? Element of danger, right? Danger. There was a man. He was asked about this word, this element of life, and what he thought of it.
Great voice. Why don't you do voiceovers, man?
I should. I'd love to. Okay, listen to Hollywood.
Yeah.
I'm your guy. Never mind. But I used to sit and watch the trailer for 7 Years in Tibet over and over and over again because I thought the guy was so good. He's like, there was a man. There was a mountain. It's like, yes! It was so awesome. That's awesome. All right. So here's the first word. It's kind of scary, but it's a simple question with a complex answer that you have to give in like less than 30 seconds. Ready? What does happiness mean to you?
I would say doing what I'm wired up to do with people that I enjoy doing it with for a mission that's worthy of the time.
Awesome. Wow. Very well done. Very well done.
Thank you.
What is success?
Doing what I'm wired up to here's the interesting thing on success is that I often get it wrong. I often think it's one thing where it's something else. And there's a interview just real quick with somebody. Her book name was Broadcasting Happiness, but I almost didn't interview her because of the name of the title. But her and her husband run a company where they talk about this, and what they say is, we often think it's achieving something, but the problem is as soon as you achieve that, the goalpost gets moved further out. And so you thought it was a touchdown, but it was only a first down, and the field keeps going farther out. So she would take those first two questions and say, the goal is to figure out what happiness is, and then it kind of doesn't matter because you're successful every day along the way. So love that. So anyway, I'll leave it at that.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. All right. Third question is a little more fun. Here's Andy. And Andy, you are now, you're going somewhere by yourself for the rest of your life. We love you. We're going to miss you.
Adios, man.
But you're headed away. It's either an island in the Pacific somewhere. Maybe it's to Mars. I don't know. You're going somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And all you can take with you for personal effects, other than what you need to just live and be sustained, right? But for entertainment, you can take with you one musical album. What do you take? Or I guess I'll give you a little room if you can't settle on one. Give us a sample of what that playlist looks like.
Oh man, I'm kind of a Pandora guy. Ooh. And so I'll often listen to different channels. I can honestly tell you I don't have like this one artist or this one album. That it really depends on the mood I'm in. And so, if I'm in if I'm in kind of a crazy mood, there's a band called Reliant K that I really enjoy. I certainly enjoy Switchfoot. If I'm in kind of I want that a little bit louder music. But a lot of times I'm listening to a Pandora channel that's just kind of really mellow music, like almost classical, And so it's honestly, if I could take Pandora with me, I would be okay on that island. What's the Wi-Fi like? Does the coconut trees have antennas on them or anything like that?
Boy, that's can you imagine deep sea Wi-Fi? That's crazy. I don't know.
Cloud, it's the ocean.
Wow. And that's where we're going to leave it. Andy Kaufman, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's a blast, Dan.
If you enjoyed what you just heard, please post your 5-star review and subscribe to Success Charger today. Your future